Today we'll talk about progressive web apps with Angular and Firebase. Real quick, just get a feel for the room. Who knows about PWAs? Who's using PWAs? Okay, some. Then this will be a helpful talk. Also, my Twitter handle is at Erik Haddad, so feel free to hit me up. A little bit about me. Studied computer science and technology management. Got an MBA, used to work at ESPN and Disney, and I've been at Google as a UX engineer for about 3 years. What is a UX engineer? I basically build prototypes for future products. A little bit about what we'll talk about today. What is Angular? What is PWA? What is Firebase? Real quick, how to use Angular with Firebase using a library. And show you how to quickly get ramped up using that library. We'll have a cool little demo, and then I'll show you some tips on how to actually benchmark your PWA and make it super efficient. And we'll do some console explorations, and we'll wrap up. All right, real quick, what is Angular? Might seem like a silly question being at an Angular conference, but for those who are just starting out, here's a little insight. Angular is a platform that makes it easy to build applications with the web. And we started off with AngularJS, and now when you hear me say Angular, I refer to V2 and V4. And the Angular CLI, it's a powerhouse. From it, whether you're beginner or a professional, you're using it to do scaffolding and generation, serving and development, building and distribution, and end-to-end testing, unit testing, and here we see Protractor and Karma. So what does that give you? You have portable code, you get PWAs, works well with Ionic, NativeScript, and Electron, which is used for desktop applications. All right, so to answer that question, for those who were not familiar with PWAs, what is a progressive web app? Well, just so you know, PWAs are a big deal. They help your app be reliable, fast, and engaging. Now, how does it do that? It uses service workers that go behind the scenes and make sure your app is running efficiently and there are no unnecessary network requests that are initiated. It also knows about your app intimately, so it can go and access things offline and serve from cache. And how is that important with Angular? Well, Angular's goal is to make your application better, always. And soon, you'll be able to get those critical tools that you need from Angular to make your app PWA compliant. And what will that look like in the future? You'll simply need to specify a service worker, true, in your Angular CLI.json. As I said, it uses knowledge of your application's files for offline cache access to minimize network requests. And you could think about it as a proxy. It knows about your app, and it knows your system. It's going back and forth and doing all the heavy lifting for you. Now, one of the things that a service worker can do is serve you up push notifications. Now, with Angular supporting PWAs, all that will require is to reference the ng service worker and just register for push. Very simple. And it's all using observables, and it's accessed in a very Angular way. Therefore, if you're already engaging with the app, you're not going to get an annoying push message. Only if you are in another tab or another window will we push the push message. So, vision for the future. As I mentioned, Angular is going to be supporting these more intimately, and your app will be PWA by default, and you won't have to do a bunch of the extra effort that's required as of right now to make your app PWA compliant. So what are the parts to this to make it work? You have a manifest.json, which I'll show you shortly, an NGSW manifest, SW register, which is straightforward, and worker basic. So here's what a sample manifest looks like. You have a long name, a short name, you have a bunch of icons, various. Oh, fun. That I can't really. Well, I promise to read through it. The lighting is not compliant. No, it's already on a dark. Yeah. Let me read through it then. We have a short name that you can specify. We have a long name that you can specify, icons at various resolutions, and then you can specify a start URL as an entry point into your app. And then as far as the NGSW manifest, you can specify your external requests, so the browser can cache those, the service worker can cache those, and then you could do some crazy stuff with regular expressions to specify incoming requests and versions and routing, etc. I apologize for that contrast. All right, so what is Firebase? Who here is familiar with Firebase? All right, more hands there. Okay, this is good. All right, so in traditional app development, you would have a device, a server, and a database. If you're old school like me, you'd think about a LAMP architecture. If you're new school, more like a mean architecture with Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node.js. That's fine, but that requires a lot of work, a lot of maintenance, a lot of making sure you're not going to get hacked, making sure that you can scale appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that you don't want to think about when you want to be innovating and creating your app. That's where Firebase comes in. You have your app drop in the Firebase SDK, and all of that magic happens behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about the architectural maintenance, et cetera. Firebase does it for you, and it scales for you. And out of the box, you get things like real-time database, storage, and auth, which I'll talk about here. All right, so Firebase database. You may have heard buzzwords with Angular. We have two-way data binding. Well, Firebase gives you three-way data binding. What does that mean? It's not just a buzzword. That means whatever you see on your screen is synced to everyone else's screen. Synced to the database, synced to everyone else, and it's on your screen. So you purely get a visual representation of the state of the data. Firebase auth. So authentication is hard. I don't know if anybody's dabbled with OAuth tokens and implementing auth 0, N, Z, add any alphabetical letter. It's hard. It's very difficult. So out of the box, you get support for third parties like Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, supports anonymous, email, password, and as of a couple months ago, phone auth, so you can register your user with their unique phone number. So why is that important? From all these third parties, we can derive a single user. You don't have to worry about people coming in from different entry points and worrying about duplicated users in your system. So from all these, we can deduce a single user, and you can serve them customized content and cater to them appropriately. Firebase Storage. First, we want to make sure that the connection is secure. We want to make sure if you go out on a hike in those trees on flaky Wi-Fi that it will indeed upload successfully. And one of my favorites here, launched back in March. This is Cloud Functions for Firebase. So what is it? It's essentially the glue between your app, Google services or cloud services, and third-party endpoints. Let's say you want to access a REST API or some other asset, or even implement your own third-party auth. This is a serverless approach to doing that. So instead of having to spin up a server with some customized code that you would have had to write and do a whole bunch of that management, for those that are familiar with Node.js, you write a little bit of code, and you deploy it to the Firebase servers, and you're all set. Logging and scaling is taken care of for you. So what exactly can it do? So if you're using the database, you can handle, it's all events driven. So if we're writing some new data, if you're creating a new user, If you've uploaded a new asset to storage, or you have a new log event for analytics, or HTTP, you handle a new request, or PubSub, something gets published. All these events you can handle and do something. And some of the things that you can hit up, cloud APIs, your Firebase database. So let's say you create a new user, you can create a new user profile within your database, things like that. And all the node modules that you've used in the past, you can reference and use. Quick example, let's say your user has uploaded a new image. Well, you don't want to spin up a server just to resize or crop or filter that image. With Cloud Functions for Firebase, the event kicks off that there is a new asset. You can access that asset, resize it, cut it, crop it, whatever you want to do to that. Maybe cater to the kids and put some doggy face with some tongue sticking out and woo, some crazy stuff to whatever that asset is, and save it appropriately. And you can cater, especially in PWAs, where you want to target people with high latency connections. You can make super small thumbnails. Other things with Cloud Functions, I covered most of these. Here are some other examples, and if you look in the lower right, these are all available as solutions for you out of the box on GitHub as function samples. And there are a bunch of other things that I haven't covered here today for ads and indexing and push notifications, et cetera, et cetera. I encourage you to check them out. All right, so now that we're familiar with Angular, PWA, and Firebase, let's talk about how Angular and Firebase work together. Now, real quick, this same library exists for AngularJS, so I know not everyone has gotten to V2, V4 of Angular, so just know that Angular Fire, the original, does support AngularJS. Today, I'm going to talk about Angular Fire 2. So, latest and greatest is at V4 RC, a lot of refactor to make it lean and mean and keep your bundle sizes down. So it's observable based. I don't know if you're familiar, RxJS, but observables are super powerful. You react to an event and keep your app in a good state. The real-time bindings with the database for that three-way data binding can handle your authentication states in real time. Let's say if somebody hits log off, your app responds accordingly. And like I said, it's modular. Only import what you need, keep your footprint down. Super quick here. This is all that's required to get started. Some NPM installs and bootstrapping your app. Some environment variables that come from the Firebase console, just 6 keys or URLs, and that's all it takes to get started. And pretty straightforward injections into your constructor for access to the Angular Fire database and Angular Fire auth. And for auth, you can see in the lower left side, this is all the code that would be required for you to have a UI that handles log in and log out. And off to the right, again, this is all in TypeScript, just so you know. So very straightforward here, log in and log out handling. And if you think about your data, it can either be in a list or collection, or just an object. So this is how you would handle lists. And again, in the lower left, there's some HTML to display the contents of that list. And off to the right, this is how you would add, update, delete. And for a single object, here's how you would represent that and how you would save, update, and delete. And this is a killer feature, just so you know, that Firebase is represented as a JSON blob. So if you're familiar with just very simple JavaScript object notation, it's just shoving it into the database. Now, getting the data back out can be problematic. Now, I mentioned this is RxJS, an observable base. Well, you can provide a subject, and when you update that subject, it'll change the parameters of the data that comes back. All in real time, you don't have to do anything. So if your user selects a checkbox, your subject has changed, and the list will automatically change for you. Super powerful, very straightforward and easy to do. And off to the right, you can see like we're changing the sort order and we're filtering. All right, all that's well and good, but it's pointless if you can't see it in action. So let's check out a demo app, and just a quick disclaimer. All right, so here's the name of the app. It's Your Mileage May Vary. There's the URL at the bottom, and a quick disclaimer. It is using miles. It is using weird date formats. I apologize, I am an American. All right, let's see this in action. So first, let's test out the push. Actually, let me just refresh the page here. I have had issues with the push notifications on a mirror display, but let's see if this works. And the demo gods have shamed me again. All right, promise you it works. Okay, we're gonna log in with Google here. And real quick, let's put this in smaller viewport. So what's happening here, I clicked a button. It's now handling the OAuth for you, and coming back, it recognizes me. And we can get started. So it's now accessing the database based on my login, and I've compiled an app that tracks all of my travel. I'm passionate about travel. I want to know how much I've traveled around the world, how much money I've spent, and break all that down. So here's a real quick app where I can visualize my boarding passes, including all the way down at the bottom, my flight here. That's fun. So that's all well and good. Now how about some stats? Built a little dashboard here. So you can visualize how many miles I traveled in the last year and a half, and how much money, and break it down and visualize it accordingly. And then there's also a fun little calculator. It's fun to actually use grade school math for once. And let's say if I flew from San Francisco directly to Tel Aviv, how many miles would that be? That's a lot of miles. Even more in kilometers. So that's all well and good. Now, what does this all look like? And for anybody who is logged into the app, this icon in the upper right next to my avatar, you can click that and actually view my data, so you don't have to upload or add any of your own flights, so you can check that out. Okay, so what does this all mean? We have a manifest here that I referenced earlier, manifest.json, that you specify theme color and background color and all those things. And then your service worker, you can monitor the state. You can unregister it, sync it, test out the push notifications that aren't working right now. And that's all well and good. So what does that look like in the console? So I have Google enabled right here. I can see the state of all the users that have accessed my application, and here's their unique ID. As I specified, all of these sign-in methods have a unique ID. And here's the visual representation of what those flights look like. So you see those cute little boarding passes. Well, this is the actual data that's behind it. Stale connection. Great. So here's our JSON blob. I'm going to expand that. I'm going to hope this is fine right there. So those boarding passes, this is all that's behind it. So you just see a tree representing all of those data values, and you can represent it in your UI however you'd like. Now the function behind it, so I handle a new user logging in. In this case, it was login with Google. So it hit the Firebase server as a new user. Now I have a cloud function for Firebase that is listening to this, and I'm creating a custom profile for that user. We can also see logging for that event and some usage. What does that function look like? So here I have a new auth record. a little better contrast ratio than earlier. But I have an onCreate event, and now I'm just creating a custom profile, and then I'm saving it away in the database. Let's step through the different files involved here. So the Angular CLI, earlier I mentioned service worker set to true. And when PWAs are supported by default, this will be very important and will be set for you. Here in the index, you have the reference to the manifest, and I'll explain soon why I decided to save my fonts locally for better PWA support. And here is my manifest.json. All the things that you saw in the Chrome developer tools represented here in text. And my NGSW manifest, especially in the lower part there, show notifications true. And that will prompt the user within the browser, do you want these notifications or not? It's not forced, it's recommended. And real quick, here's the TypeScript around my app component, handling auth and different layout using observables if the layout changes. So one of the key factors in your PWA is to make it so you can resize from widescreen desktop all the way down to the smallest viewport. You can do that in CSS with media queries, and you can also do it with Angular flex layout observables. And here's some cute math that's behind that mileage calculator. An underrated feature of Firebase is the security and rules. So straightforward syntax for rules, also in JSON. Let's say for my user flights here, I want to make sure that in order to read the data, a user is logged in. Here, in order to write to this user ID entry, the person has to be logged in and it has to be me. So this simple text here enforces the security for the app. And here for generic airline data, I'm setting it to read and nobody can write to it. It's just a reference. And I can also set indexing for database performance. Now, how does that all go out to the cloud? Well, here I have some commented out CLI code that you can build out a custom app shell from your existing app and generate a manifest. That's up to you whether you want to do that. I chose instead to go with a manifest that I created myself. But if you go out on GitHub, that code is there, and it uses Angular Universal to generate that. And then you just use Firebase deploy. It goes out to the code. It pushes your functions and sets your database rules, your storage rules, and tells you that it's live on hosting. And in this case, I have a custom domain set up. So Firebase will also set up that custom domain and handle redirects, et cetera. And you see that it is all HTTPS supported. So that is a free certificate that you get with Firebase hosting. Now, what does that all look like on an actual device? So here we'll check out what that experience will actually look like for a user using their phone. And Wi-Fi. Guess not. Cool. All right, we'll just use our imaginations here. So next, how are we going to benchmark our app? So Lighthouse used to be a Chrome extension. It's now embedded inside Chrome developer tools. What does Lighthouse do? It performs audits on your app to let you know where you can improve, how you're compliant, and how you stack up. So if we were to run a quick audit of our app here, we'd be looking for this Audits tab, perform an audit, and run. Now this is going to test in different scenarios with high latency connections and let's say JavaScript does not initiate, your assets don't load, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see that come through and you'll get a full readout of how you do as a PWA, what your performance metric is, what are your best practices, and how accessible is your app. So now that it's completing, oh, wow. So just a little tidbit here. Wow, performance looks awful. Some of these metrics will vary from test to test. I'm not going to do another audit to prove that it should be around a 70, but you can get an idea here of how your PWA performance and accessibility and best practice metrics are, and you can visualize the app as it progresses, and it'll give you ideas of how to improve your app. So that's Lighthouse. And so some things to keep in mind for PWA, as I mentioned, your site has to be served over HTTPS. Firebase offers you that for free. Your pages are responsive, and I showed you how to do that, media queries and flex layout using observables. You specified a start URL in your manifest, and you provided the metadata in your manifest for your icons and colors and naming, et cetera. And keep in mind, you want to have this loading really fast on flaky connections, and your site works across browser. And don't go crazy with your page transitions, and each page has a URL. Now, I mentioned site works across browsers. PWA support right now by browser, a little flaky. It's coming along, though. Safari and Firefox should have support very soon. And you can always rely on Chrome to do your testing and development, so you're ready for the future. In summary, so PWAs are a big deal, and they'll soon be supported by default by Angular. Firebase auth database hosting and storage make development easy, secure, and scalable, so you can focus on innovating rather than maintenance. Angular Fire is the library you'd use, both for AngularJS and for Angular, to connect Angular with Firebase, and use best practices and tools like Lighthouse to benchmark your app, and focus on innovation always, and don't worry about the maintenance part. Real quick, Firebase is free to hack on, so don't worry about all that. The thresholds are super high, your quotas are very high, you're not going to hit it, so feel free to hack away and create that app that you always thought about creating, and let's say it takes off, it's a hit. There are other pricing tiers, Flame, $25 per month, and Blaze is pay-as-you-go. And keep in mind, Firebase is part of Google. When you create a Firebase project, it exists in the cloud with Google Cloud. So let's say your app really takes off, and you want to add some machine learning, you want to add a whole bunch of other Google Cloud services, that project already exists. You don't have to start from scratch. So it'll scale for your users and scale for you. Real quick, credits and references. So you can find that out on GitHub as well. And Toda, thank you.